Welcome to the $1 Billion Podcast, a weekly show about the entrepreneurial journey and making it big in any industry. We're your hosts, Joe White and Kane Daniel. Welcome to our podcast. Our guest today is Heather Stone. Welcome, Heather.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. Heather brings insights from a life rich in family and education with a passion for bridging generational gaps. From American Fork, Utah, she's transitioned from corporate leadership to authoring upcoming works like The Problem of Togetherness and Getting the Right Hand Right, and founding Practical PhD, focusing on executive education and effective leadership. So Heather, it's fantastic to have you with us. Thanks so much.
It's a pleasure to be here today, Joe.
Yeah, maybe we can start it off with, I know you launched Practical PhD last year, basically to teach executives how to succeed at managing or being a right-hand leader. I don't think a lot of our listeners will really know what the concept of a right hand is, so maybe you could fill us in on that and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, great question. So a right hand is the other top leader in the room. So a CEO or a founder can't really ever sell the business, expand the business, step away and breathe for a minute if they don't know how to have another top leader in the room at the same time. Somebody to run things in their absence or to run things part of the business while the CEO runs the other part of the business. And so Practical PhD is just all about teaching people how to work between two top leaders, high-powered, opinionated, executive-level people who don't always naturally know how to work together.
Fantastic. And for full disclosure, I met Heather in a tech meeting, which is, it stands for the Executive Committee. It's a peer group of executives. And Heather did a presentation on the right hand. And that led me to think, it was a fantastic presentation and we could learn a lot, especially smaller businesses, even larger businesses. But, Kane is the co-host on this podcast, but we also work closely together. And I guess for me, it's important to understand the different functions of the management team and the executive. So for your upcoming book, Getting the Right Hand Right, maybe you could tell us what you teach in workshops like the one that I attended.
Yeah, thanks for asking. So what I provide is a roadmap, almost a formula for how to manage that right-hand relationship. So, I have a cute little acronym. Getting the right hand right is RIGHT. It's 5 key elements of managing that right-hand relationship. And it's tools and skills that can be used by any personality. So it's not just about personality match. A lot of times when we talk about, I need to get a second in command, I need to get a right hand, we turn to the person we knew from high school. We don't all have that luxury. And frankly, it doesn't always work when you turn to the person you know from high school because personality match is not the whole game. And so I just take executives through this systematic approach to examining communication, examining decision-making, reporting, and how you know that the right hand is actually doing the right job, and the actual function of helping the CEO thrive, which is a big part of the right-hand job.
It's very interesting for Joe and I know we talked a little bit before we started that we have the generational gap and then also the right hand. So I think you're very familiar with that. So it'll be interesting as we have this discussion. But I'm curious, just for what you said, is there a threshold or is there some sort of way that someone, an entrepreneur could know if they're now ready for a right hand?
Yes. Yeah, I actually take people through a process to identify that, but one of the key questions is, have you had significant change in your business recently? Maybe this is bringing in outside money, maybe this is, starting another venture on the side, or a personal challenge or life circumstance that has changed your involvement. Maybe it's something negative, like you've dropped the ball on a major customer situation or something like that. These are triggers that you're at your limit and some sort of change in leadership has to happen. So I have a list of 10 triggers actually that I teach people.
You want to give us maybe the top 3?
Yeah. Yeah, give me a minute to pull it up. But definitely some of those that I mentioned are on the list, right? In terms of business change that needs to happen.
We see this in our industry, in the mortgage industry. Brokers will start doing more and more business and then start hiring agents and transitioning from broker to entrepreneur, and then finding that right time to hire even an assistant. It can be incredibly challenging, but also, hiring anyone that's an executive style or leadership person, I think is very challenging to know when that time is. So this is very helpful and pertinent, especially for our listeners.
Yeah, it's really true that it's a tricky decision to make. So some of the top reasons, if you landed a huge contractor customer that's bigger than anything you've done in the past, if the founder adds their 7th direct report, because 7 seems to be a magic number where you suddenly can't manage it yourself anymore, even if you think you can.
Really?
Yeah, I found that to be definitely true. Sometimes it's a next generation family member who wants to join the business, and so something has to shuffle around there. Or maybe the CEO has a timeline to monetize the business, to sell a piece of the company or to retire in some way, and has finally articulated that, in the next 3 years I need to do this, or in the next 5 years I need to do this. And as soon as the timeline is identified in the CEO's head, that's actually a leadership trigger.
That makes sense. So, Heather, you have this book coming out, Getting the Right Hand Right.
Yeah.
Maybe you could tell me, I'm fascinated from behind the scenes. How is the experience been in writing the book?
Yeah, so I have 2 books coming out, and the first one was extremely difficult to write, and the second one has been much easier because I learned a few things, right? So I could share that with you.
Which one did you write first?
So The Problem of Togetherness is first, and part of why that's difficult is because I'm co-authoring it with a 29-year-old and I am 54. So we're modeling the generational tension that we're actually writing about, and she's a phenomenal co-author. She is smart as can be. She's done her own research in the area. She's incredibly engaged, but she also just never lets me only see it from my point of view, which is great and reflects in the book some really wonderful insights, but it also means every single step has been painful for both of us. We actually have been working on it for 3.5 years, for perspective, for that book.
Wow, and is that coming out this year?
I think it'll actually hit the market early next year, probably.
Okay.
We're just in the editing cycle with that one. The Getting the Right Hand Right book is coming out later this year, and that one is single author. I'm authoring that one, and that one I got smart. I got a book coach to help me be systematic and organized about my pre-writing process, and her name is Ann Janzer, by the way, if anyone needs an excellent book coach. She's incredible. And every meeting has just refined what I'm doing, so now that I'm actually writing, I just immediately know. There's no wandering about. What data do I need? How do I approach this? And I'm excited about that book. That book is practical application of the roadmap and the key concepts. So it's structured with the kind of questions that right hands and CEOs ask. Like, for example, CEOs will say, well, I need to change priorities and I already got the right hand working on a set of things. How do I change priorities without blowing up the right hand? Right? That's a big question CEOs have.
Yeah.
Right hands say, my CEO is always changing things. Well, how do I manage that? That's the same question with the same answer from 2 different perspectives, right? So the book is a series of questions that are thematically organized that give you the how to manage that specific issue.
As you mentioned, it sounds very practical and something that, I think it's probably overlooked in managing that top level executive. And yeah, this is going to be a very timely book. How has the process been for you? Like, walk me through a day of writing. What's it look like?
So the hardest part about writing a book is finding time to actually write, because everything else is interrupt driven and everything else is a person right in front of you who wants something. And so setting aside time to write is incredibly difficult, even for a writer like me who's been writing for years in some fashion or another. The best suggestion is to figure out your own cadence for that. Maybe you write a couple hours in the morning every morning, or maybe you marathon it, with an all-day session once every couple weeks, or whatever works for you as carving out that time. But until I got serious about carving out that time, I really didn't make progress in the way I needed to. So
that makes sense. So really prioritizing what's important to you, and obviously the book is important to you, and it's going to be important to readers as well, undoubtedly.
I hope so. I get a lot. I've been in front of, I counted yesterday, I've been in front of 470 executives in the last 6 months, teaching my workshops and doing one-on-one coaching with these executives and in small group meetings. And most of those are CEOs, some key executives, right hands, CEOs will bring their right hands. And what I have really learned in that intensive time period of talking to so many people is that nobody's providing practical information about how to do this. There really is a gap here. There really is an urgent need to solve this problem in a way that you can actually take your business forward. So
And
I'm
Heather,
excited
having
that it resonates. Go ahead, Kane. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Having had those conversations, it's amazing that you've met with so many executives. That's such a. I'm sure you have a ton of information to curate about what's been happening.
Yeah.
What do you think is the biggest or one of the biggest challenges that they're having in relation to the right hand and getting it right with that? Like, what are they finding after having those conversations?
Yeah. Yeah, great question. Well, one of the most interesting things was the worries of the CEO versus the worries of the right hand, right? So I did some research on that because CEOs and right hands don't worry about the same thing. And, Kane, you're a right hand. I'm not telling you something you don't already know, right? In terms of you have different priorities. But the CEO worries about 4 things. They worry whether they will be able to manage a right hand. It's a black box. They're like, if the right hand fails, will it be my fault or theirs? How do I support them? I don't actually know. I can see the inputs going in the box and I can see the outputs, but I don't know what input connects to what outputs, meaning it's a mystery to me. So that's the first thing CEOs worry about. They worry about lack of alignment. Will the right hand execute my vision or theirs? Because that could be deadly for a company. They worry that the other stakeholders won't like it. This is a big one. So the others on the leadership team might have a problem if I elevate one to right hand, or my spouse or the other owners or partners. Like they don't know how to fit the right hand into the team. And this is probably the most important CEO worry. They worry that they'll lose their connection to the team. And what this means is 2 things for a founder or a CEO. It means the only way I know if my company is successful is by walking around and talking to people. So if I'm not walking around and talking to people, how will I know the thing's on track? That's a big deal. Go ahead. No, I was just going to say the other thing that means is, who am I if I'm not doing this? That I've been running this business, I've been owning this thing, I've been the face of this for so long. If someone else takes over some of this, like, I won't matter anymore. So those are the CEO worries that I've seen, founder worries.
Yeah, it's funny that you said that. That's exactly what I was going to ask about in a little bit of a different way. So that if you, I guess backing up even from there, if you're in a position now to hire a right hand, what is the title? Like, how is that process normally done?
Yeah. Well, there's a man named Cameron Herold who wrote a book called Second in Command, and he has a statement he makes in there that this is the hardest hire, the COO hire, the right-hand hire is the hardest senior job description to write because it can be anything you want. And he's exactly right. So a right-hand can be a president, a COO, a CEO, a partner, a general manager, a director. There's a million titles. It just depends on what the pair of you need and what the company needs, what the stage of the company is and the cycle you're in.
That makes a lot of sense, because I was going to ask about partnership as well and transitioning from, or maybe there's not a transition. Maybe the right hand is by output only and not necessarily defined by partnership or anything else. So, or title even. Yeah.
Yeah, well, when I was a company president, 4 different times I was a company president, and twice I was a hired president, and twice I was a president as a 50-50 owner to a partner who was the CEO, right? So that's a right-hand relationship that has full ownership, and your listeners probably have that scenario more commonly than not. And I was still running the business, but I had a boss, because when you have a partner, you have a boss, right? So like that right-hand relationship definitely is relevant for partnerships.
Do you think that ends up being defined partially by the personalities and skill sets of the individuals rather than anything else?
So when I teach people to define the new job, the right-hand job, a little more formally, and the new CEO job, I teach them to start with what they care about, what their superpowers are, what they want to keep at all costs, what they want to give away as a first choice. And so both the right hand and the CEO get asked these questions, right? What do if you could keep any part of this, what is it that you want to keep? And the answers are all over the map. Some people say strategy, some people say finance. Like every CEO wants to keep a different thing. Every right hand, I ask the right hands, if you could only do one thing in this job, what do you want to do the most? And they say people management or be part of strategy decisions. Like they say all kinds of things. I start there so that you don't structure the job to give away the thing you like the most.
Right.
Either one of you.
Yeah, the other thing I found fascinating in the presentation that you gave was the communication structure in knowing who should be speaking to whom about what, and you gave a fantastic chart on how to handle that. And you know what? That's something that we're implementing here because we find that as we've grown, there are, as you mentioned in the workshop, sometimes people get mixed messages from two different people in management and they don't know what to do. So maybe you can speak a bit about that, because I think that probably happens quite a bit, right?
Yeah, it does. And if you don't think it happens, it means you haven't asked your team. Because it's not the right hand and the CEO who are confused, it's the team, right? It's everybody else that they work with. Yeah, what you're talking about is a tool I call the talking tool. And it is based on understanding the kind of talk you intend to have and understanding the different audiences that the CEO or right hand could talk to. So, for example, I've identified 4 kinds of talk, and chatting is no agenda but relationship building. Instructing is assigning work or unassigning work or changing the priorities on work, and those are very different. If you think about it as an owner, we start out chatting and we end up making assignments like 5 seconds later, but they're different kinds of talk. Chat is not the same as instruct, right? And report and research are the other 2 kinds of talk. And report is communicating status or decisions or progress. How is that going with that customer? Well, we canceled that project. That's status. That's reporting, right? And research is information gathering without any commitments or assignments. So what a founder doesn't realize is that research is different and its own thing. And that's how you keep knowing what's going on in your business. You can still do research in your business. You might not be the one to give instructions. Maybe your right hand is supposed to give the instructions to the employees now. But you can gather all kinds of information. You can say, oh, tell me more. Does everybody think that? Oh, I'm making a note. Thanks for sharing that with me. And your employee really feels heard, but you didn't give him instructions when you weren't the one to give him instructions.
I love, Heather, that you mentioned communication as part of this, or I know, Joe, you brought it up.
Yeah.
We've been through this, Joe and I, quite a bit with communication and lost messages. And I think what we've learned as well is repetition of the message, and as you mentioned, delivering messages in different ways to different people. We've also, and I'm wondering to get your input on the role of technology and how that shapes this type of communication and where you see that going in the future.
Yeah. One of the companies I ran was fully remote. And so I've used a lot of technology communication, and part of my PhD includes a digital humanities emphasis. So I'm familiar with many technology issues. That does not make me an expert, because none of us are experts in technology. That's the first thing to realize, is that the technology is just a tool to solve the problem, and we can be experts in our world and the problem we're trying to solve. And any technology then is fair game to help us solve that problem. So that's kind of the technology agnosticism, is sort of what I advocate for communication. Use the technology that helps you solve the problem, but understand the communication problem first.
Yeah, that's brilliant. We have seen the fact where one department head goes to another department head and says, we need to get this done. And I talk to Joe about that. And then I hear that, well, that's not the way I remember the conversation. And that's something, right? That's important, because when the person hearing that from another department head doesn't know if they're supposed to be taking direction and whom they're supposed to be taking direction from, it can really cause confusion in the workplace and unhappy a work environment. So yeah, when I saw that and when we went through that, it was like a eureka moment for me. A little light bulb went off, and I thought, wow, this is so easy to do. It just needs to be mapped out, and people need to be told about it. And that's what I found brilliant about that sheet that you had, that chart.
I'll put the talking tool on my website, practicalphd.com, so that people can come and get it, because it is really simple. You literally just define your audiences. Maybe your audiences are, department heads, employees who work for the right hand, customers, key customers. You just define the types of audiences you could talk to, and then you just say, so see who owns the talking relationship with this audience? That's the key question. And then based on that, who can chat? And you and your right hand just sync up on that. And it's a one-time conversation that takes you 10 minutes, and it really can greatly minimize confusion in your organization.
So I assume, Heather, for example, if we had that the right hand gives instruction to department heads, then the CEO or whomever would be best for them to do some research, maybe chatting, and then talk to the right hand, and then make sure that everything's aligned, and then have the right hand be the one delivering the message or the instruction, other than the CEO walking around thinking, you know what, this is my house. I can tell anybody to do whatever they want to, whoever I want them to, right?
Let's keep in mind, it is the CEO's house, and they can do that, and they will do that. And the reason
maybe
CEOs
they shouldn't do it as often as sometimes we, and I'm not, of course, not talking about myself, but sometimes we do.
Yeah. No, and well, you bring up a couple of really good points. You bring up the point that it's often the boss who derails the communication, right? It's often the boss. And we don't mean to as bosses. We just forget that we're wearing a crown and a purple robe, and whatever we say, talk gets weird. People do things we didn't mean it to be an assignment, and it turned out to be one, or whatever, right? So as the boss, we have the responsibility to kind of make sure that we're having the kind of talk we intended to have. That's the first point. But the second point is that there's no hard, fast rule that the CEO can't talk to certain categories of people. It's literally whatever you two decide. But whatever you two decide is what you thought was going to be most effective in your organization. So you should follow it. But the third point I'll bring up on that, Joe, is the one that the reason CEOs talk to everybody and the reason CEOs break rules is because they have this uncanny radar for something being wrong in the business, right? So if we make this rule that Kane is going to give the operations managers the instructions, and you're not going to give instructions, but you think something's off in the operation, you'll talk to Kane about it a couple of times, you'll noodle it, you'll think about it, and then you'll just start talking to all those operations managers, and Kane will be like, I thought we decided you weren't going to give instructions. You weren't going to engage this deeply with the operations managers. What is going on here? Well, that's the critical point where the right hand should say, what are you seeing about the business that I'm not seeing? Right? Use the talking tool to surface the actual business problem. And then Joe will say, oh, I'm worried that there's a market shift and operationally we're getting left behind. And I don't think you're seeing it, Kane. Well, great. That's the business problem. Let's solve that. Not the talking problem, right?
Right.
So CEOs, you don't ignore them. You're not trying to neutralize them or make them shut up. You're trying to deploy them in all the right ways in the organization as a right hand.
I think what you're saying, Heather, is incredibly important to understand the impact of a CEO's words on any employee is deeper and more impactful. And so it's so important to have effective communication and for the CEO to realize their impact of their words. It's not, as you mentioned, a toss away or a one-off or a brainstorming session that actually wasn't supposed to be a big project, but became a big project because I was having a beer and talking about something that would be cool to do, right? So I think it's really super important to have that, to know that. And then actually, I think makes it more impactful when the CEO does have those words with the operations manager because it's not happening as frequently and it is more impactful. So it's
laser
super
focused
important
on exactly the thing. Well, the idea of being able to do research in the organization is liberating for founders because they have continually been wrestling between engaging and it looks like micromanagement or stepping out and I worry all the time about whether the thing is happening, right? Research is some high-ranking, important owner wants to ask me questions and learn how it's going,
Yeah.
all the employees are delighted with that connection, and the CEO gets tons of information. What do you do next as a CEO? Do you immediately jump in and start giving instructions, or say, oh yeah, we talked in executive meeting last week about canceling that kind of customer who's such a problem for you? Great, did you just cancel my customer? You can't jump into the instruction part so quickly, but if you just take all that information and go to your right hand, the two of you can do amazing things with that information.
Yeah, that's a great point. I had a conversation, it was a real world example. I had a conversation with our tech department and floated an idea that I had, and then they give weekly reports on what they've done in the past week. In the weekly report, he spent 38 hours working on the project that I just casually mentioned because he thought that I was telling him that I wanted him to do that. And I thought, oh my goodness, what is wrong with my communication? And it's exactly as you've highlighted. Right?
Your words trump everyone else's, right? If you said
true.
This is something that would be cool. Yeah.
So there's a CEO of a company called Wealth Factory, and what he does is every time he has a conversation with an employee who doesn't work for him, he ends the conversation by saying, are you walking away thinking I'm giving you any assignments? And about half the time, the answer is yes, and he meant it to be no. So he resets it right there.
Wow. That's a brilliant idea.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. What a great way to clarify.
Isn't it great? Yeah, I liked it too.
Not really shifting gears, but I'm wondering if you think, Heather, that this, or if you've seen in your conversations with CEOs and other executives, that this problem of togetherness, are you seeing the right hand and the owners, are you seeing this gap often? And if so, is that why the problem of togetherness was born? And maybe just, if you can give us a little bit of insight there, how these might fit together.
Yeah, it's an interesting question because the two projects have very different audiences, right? The problem of togetherness is generational tension in religious communities between older and younger adults, and getting the right hand right is in business settings with a right hand and a CEO. But they are both about togetherness, meaning they're both about the challenges of having, two fully actualized individuals trying to function in the same space in some way. And that the problem of togetherness, as my co-author and I define it, is the challenge of being fully individual and also fully connected to other people at the same time, right? To not feel like I have to sacrifice who I am to be in this relationship with someone else or part of a group, and to not feel like we have to squish people in some way in order to work with them, right? It's that healthy balance of the two that is it's difficult in religion, it's difficult in the workplace, it's difficult in families. Togetherness is a hard thing, and we tend to just opt out and say, oh, we just won't join anything or be part of anything, or we tend to just dominate and say, just do it my way, and both of those are hard. So.
Are you finding similarities with, you mentioned generational gap a couple times, are you finding similarities with issues that similar generations will experience with, again, similar generational people?
Well, one of the important lessons as we wrote the book was the realization that it's a then and now book, not an us and them book. Meaning the way things used to be and the way things are now in terms of our interaction with groups is what has changed. And so younger generations are native to that, but older generations are still in the middle of it, right? So it's really a then and now situation that I think is causing most of the tension in the workplace and in close-knit organizations like religious communities, because everybody's in the same now, but the older generation remembers it being different. Like, I can give you an example. You want me to give you an example of that?
Yeah.
So,
Love that.
Advocacy works different now, right? I'm an organizational scholar. My degree is in organizational communication, by the way, my PhD, in case that gives you some background for this. But advocacy works different now. So in my day, advocacy looked like this. Something isn't right, I'm going to talk to the boss. And I would talk to the person in charge, whoever that was, the pastor, the boss, the whatever. And if my comments went nowhere and made no difference, I would wait a little bit and do it again, and I would wait a little bit and do it again, and I would get frustrated, and I would either eventually see change, or I would finally get to the point where it was so painful to not have the change that I would start to get other people to lobby for the change. And I would start talking to coworkers. I would get a petition going. I would finally go public with the newspaper or something like that, right? So that's how advocacy worked 20 years ago, 25, 30 years ago, right? Now, advocacy works like this. I wonder if other people are having this problem. If this is even a valid problem, I will turn to the crowd and ask if anyone else is having this problem. So immediately I introduce the problem to the public, right? And then when the crowd seems to vet the problem as a legitimate problem, and that's the "I'm not the crazy one" question that you see said, with the swear word in the middle. But once the crowd says, "Yeah, you're not crazy, that is in fact a problem," then I say, would anybody else be interested in helping me try to solve this problem? Has anybody else really, ready? And so then I muster the crowd to begin to solve the problem, right? And then I formalize the crowd. I post, I start a platform, I do something to formalize the crowd. And then when the crowd is fully mobilized, I go to the boss and I say, everybody wants a change. And the boss is like, what the heck? How come you just didn't come to me first? Why did you go nuclear before you even talked to me? That doesn't even make sense to me. But it makes total sense to today's digital natives who can talk directly to a zillion people without ever having to work through this organizational framework of the boss, right? It's a huge disconnect.
It's so funny, Heather, as you've been talking, I'm just replaying in the last week, I had a little mini tiff with my wife, and she's like, you know what? I'm going to post a poll on Instagram and ask all of my audience what they think.
Yeah, I was there for that. I remember that. It was hilarious.
Well, there's inherent bias here, right? I mean, you're the one doing the post. You're the one framing the situation. It's your friends and your audience, so do whatever you want. But there's no ammunition here that you're going to be able to use. But what I'm hearing now is that I'm the boss, so that's great.
Not in your family. I didn't say that with your spouse, that you're the boss. But,
I don't think that was the message that you were supposed to take away, Kane.
Yeah, you're always the right hand in a spouse relationship. In case you don't know.
I do have a question though. I think I'm also part of the same, not the same tech group as Joe, but I'm in the same organization, and I'm understanding as we go through this how many CEOs and business leaders are older than me that are in a separate generation. I'm 38. I'm not that young, but I'm wondering what advice do you have for if there's anything impactful for those CEOs that are maybe 50, 60 plus to connect with better with the audiences that are millennials or younger, to try to bridge that gap in then and now, as you mentioned.
Well, what isn't different is that we're all people. What isn't different is that we like to be listened to. We want to make a difference. We want our ideas to matter. We want to help each other. That stuff has not changed. What has changed is our relationship to individual and group. The power is sort of shifted to individuals and away from institutions. So the boss, even though I said the boss has the crown and the purple robe, that is shifting, meaning people don't want the boss to have the crown and the purple robe, right? Older generation folks engaging with younger generation leaders might run into a situation where those younger generation leaders don't by default think the organization should have the power that it used to have. They don't by default think that the person with the rank and authority is the one you should listen to. They actually want you to prove you're right, not just that you're in charge, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think a little more awareness of that. A lot of times the older generation feels threatened, meaning they feel sort of attacked. The younger generation sometimes says, well, you're biased, you're oblivious, you're racist, you're whatever the claims are, and that actually comes from a then and now disconnect too, meaning that in today's generations, declaring your stance publicly on things is a very important way to establish who you are. You did not go public with your identity and your stance on things. So I might be very opposed to an instance of racism I see in my community, but my default as a person raised in the 80s and 90s is not going to be to post publicly about how offensive I find that. It's to commit privately to not do that and to see if there's things I could do behind the scenes to make that person who is victimized better, right? That's not the instincts of the younger generation. The instincts of the younger generation are to shine public light on this, be more transparent about it, take a public stance. So if you, as an older person, don't take a public stance, the younger person might assume that you don't agree with some of these important causes. And that is sometimes why the older generation feels attacked or threatened, is because they feel accused of not being aware of the right issues or caring about justice, which we do, obviously.
So obviously, with the problem of togetherness, do you address how to communicate between these two different generations?
Yeah, we do, and we address things like how to identify pressures you're feeling from other people, and to identify for yourself how you want to engage with each group you're in, how you want to engage with your religious community, what does and doesn't work for you in the workplace, versus just, there's a lot of talk about boundaries today, and boundary is very one-sided. I set a boundary of what you can't do to me, right? We talk about togetherness, which is how do we connect and respect each other's individuality, whereas boundaries are often about how do we separate to preserve my individuality. So it's a little bit of a flip there.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
Switching gears, I do have to tell you where the name of my company came from, because I feel like no podcast would be complete without it. It's a great story. So my company name is Practical PhD, and I have a PhD in organizational communication, as I mentioned. And when I was in PhD school, I had run 3 companies by that point, and I had 25 years of business experience. So the part of PhD school I was most excited for was a class on workplace communication, because I thought, finally, I'll fit in, right? I'll have something to contribute. I've been doing this for years. And after 2 weeks, the teacher took me aside, and she said, Heather, you're not really going to succeed in PhD school if you just don't take this out of the practitioner level and up to the level of ideas, because we really don't deal with the applied practice in PhD school. We deal with the ideas. And I thought, you crazy person. I thought, I do not ever want to live completely in the world of ideas, because what is the use of a good idea if you can't put it to work in some way? So I went out that day and registered the practicalphd.com URL. And my mission is to bring great ideas to applied life, not just live at the ethereal idea level, right?
That's amazing. Yeah, that can't be stressed enough, that there are all kinds of ideas, and if you can't apply them, they're just that. They're waxing poetic, sitting around having a drink or just talking, and it ends up being potentially a waste of time. Obviously, brainstorming isn't a waste of time, developing ideas, but you're so right. There's 2 steps in the process. You come up with the ideas, and then you see if they're practical and they have a place in the real world, which it sounds like that professor was not interested in.
Well, and to be fair to her, she was trying to help me succeed in graduate school. And she was right that as a business person, I came much more action-oriented, let's get to it, than a lot of my peers. And there was a disconnect there. She wasn't bad at her job. She wasn't, oblivious to the real world. She just didn't think that the application mattered the way I thought it mattered.
Right. And you know what? In the real world, when it comes down to business, application is a cornerstone of success.
Yeah, that's what people like about my workshops. That, it's great to go and hear a bunch of good ideas, but if there's nothing you can put to work immediately, you forget it all 5 seconds later. And I get people 2 or 3 months after coming to my workshop who email me for an additional copy of the workbook to do it with another right-hand pair that they're working on, right? It's just so hands-on.
That's awesome. We find this, we're in education at REMIC as well. We do education. We found that as well, as we take feedback and do, our own research and studies, that even if you start with case studies or examples to demonstrate the theory, right? Just to showcase it, it is a good start to practical sort of learning, right? And so I think that's so important. I think you're right. And it's also, I love that you wrote the book, or if you were going to co-author it, that you did it with someone that it obviously makes a lot of sense to do with someone who's of different generations, because you're living through, as you're writing the book, what you're talking about. So that must have been a pretty wild experience. And you said it was 3 years you guys were writing it?
3.5 years, yeah.
Wow.
We did a bunch of interviews too. It included 70 oral history interviews and a lot of extensive research behind it. But mostly it's the idea that the new changes in technology, specifically direct connection, direct access to people and direct access to ideas without an organizational gatekeeper, which is content creation technology and social media, basically, have changed our relationship with the organization, which has totally changed our relationship with each other, which has made togetherness way different than it used to be.
Yeah, I'm finding that, and this is something that we talk about at Remick as well. I think you touched on it before about virtue signaling, and especially with the much younger generation and what that means, and how much of that is always authentic with every individual, and how much of it is just signaling, right? And trying to figure those individuals out. I know people that are of 50 plus generation that get very frustrated with that, trying to see, was this person just copying and pasting these stories, or do they actually care and are taking action? And to your point earlier,
it's not on the 50. He didn't name names, Joe. It's not on the 50-year-old to figure out whether the 25-year-old is being authentic or not. It's on the 50-year-old to connect personally with the 25-year-old and understand what that person cares about. Right? We can never judge whether someone else is authentically representing an opinion. Maybe they're putting it out there to try it on and see what they think, and that happens a lot these days. But the point isn't to argue with the idea. The point is to know the person, because when you know the person, you've made an individual connection, and you can then find common ground, whatever it is.
I think that's really important advice for those in that position right now that are looking at that or thinking about that in their business, especially, or maybe not especially, but definitely in the business world.
Well, Heather, you know what? In the past 50 minutes or so, we've gotten to know you, and we really appreciate the time that you've spent with us today. Is there anything that you'd like to close with? Anything that you would like to throw out there that we haven't talked about?
I would just leave you with a message of hope. Sometimes as a CEO or a founder, you just think there's no option. You're just stuck in this treadmill of running this thing, and if you step away, your presence and pressure is removed and the whole thing falls apart. And that, if you can get the right-hand relationship right, there's a quote, everything you want in life is a relationship away. If you get this right, your life will be so much better. It will be amazing.
Fantastic words and fantastic quote. And I think, with my relationship with Kane, I think we got lucky. And we got lucky.
It was lucky, not purposeful. I don't think either one of us set out to say, I'm going to be a right-hand man in the way that you're talking about, or Joe saying, I need this right-hand man. So we got very, very lucky. But I can see how it would be definitely needed and looked at purposefully. Heather, where can our listeners find you online?
Practicalphd.com is my website. And I will say on your luck and purpose comment, the difference between luck and purpose is often the amount of time it takes to get it right. Like if you're purposeful, you can get there faster. Right?
Oh, well said.
I like that.
Yeah.
It's a good way to close it out.
This has been eye-opening and really fantastic. You know what, Heather? This is. I'm sure that the information that you've shared is going to help individuals and leaders, even prior to your book coming out. But when your book comes out, I think that's going to be inspirational and impactful for a lot of leaders, just like your workshop has been. So I don't know if you're going to continue on with the workshops, but I hope you do, because there's a lot of CEOs out there, I think, who need what you're doing.
Thank you. Well, folks can sign up for my newsletter at the website and get this content, and then they'll get notification that the book is coming. So
fantastic. And I'm sure there's going to be a lineup for that book. So we're looking forward to getting it. And maybe we'll definitely get you back on once the book is published, so we can hear about how it's going and some of the feedback and really delve into that a little bit more.
Well, thanks for having me today. You guys are delightful to talk with. I think you're doing such good to reveal the inside of all these topics to the listeners, the founders and the listeners who are your audience. So thanks for having me.
Our
Excellent.
pleasure.
Thank you, Heather. Thanks for tuning in to the $1 Billion Podcast. Make sure to subscribe to the show so you never miss an episode.
For more in-depth entrepreneurial insights, follow us on social media, and for more info on the show, go to billiondollarpodcast.com.
See you next time.